If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. And of course, be sure to give the video a like as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that. And now, the Sunday address. Oh, just when you thought it was safe to speak against white power, here they come again. The New York Court of Appeals has overturned Harvey Weinstein's conviction in his New York rape trial, and they've ordered a new trial for him. The basis they gave was that the introduction of prior bad acts witnesses should not have been allowed in his trial. So what they're saying is when the judge allowed the prosecution to bring in other people other than his accuser to say he did this and he did that, they're saying, that's foul. He shouldn't have done that. According to the white media, whether or not to allow the testimony of prior bad acts in a trial is supposed to be up to the judge's discretion. Now, a standard like that is a recipe for I'm white and I say so. You had a lot of people, of course, who have been crying tears about this, others who are shocked and such, but over here in the black media, we're not surprised at all. We'll get to that in a moment. But I do think I have to add that during the Cosby trial, accusations from other accusers was allowed into evidence at that trial. And when it came time for Cosby to file an appeal, the appeals court didn't even mention that. They didn't think that was important at all. So, were it not for the blatantly illegal introduction of the civil trial deposition, Cosby would still be in prison right now. Because in the case of Cosby, prior bad acts were fair game, no problem at all, no technicality here, no procedural violations either. Now, the case against Weinstein was far stronger than the nothing burger that was tried against Cosby, and in the case of Weinstein, he was actually on trial for rape. Bill Cosby, when they tried to do some phony baloney rape accusation against him, that failed. That's why the prosecutors had to downgrade the charges and go with something else that basically was a form of sexual misconduct. Like, well, there was some unsanctioned hanky-panky going on. But with Weinstein, it was actually rape. But look at how they ignore one set of circumstances and conveniently consider another. See the double standard? And all these cases of police murdering black people, and not one of these prosecutors has tried to introduce prior bad acts for any of those thugs. And most of them have prior bad acts of violence long before they finally killed a black person. Before he strangled Eric Garner to death, Daniel Pentaleo had been successfully sued twice for racial profiling and police brutality. The city of New York had to shell out $100,000 to settle those lawsuits. Derek Chauvin, before he murdered George Floyd, he had already been involved in a number of police brutality cases, one where he did the same kind of kneeling on a black person's neck for minutes on end. But in the case of Daniel Pentaleo, the white media memory hold his prior bad acts, and in the case of Derek Chauvin, they didn't introduce his prior bad acts at all. Nobody tries to introduce this at trial, even though these demonstrate a pattern of behavior. But now, all of a sudden, they want prior bad acts to be thrown out. It's not fair game. Yeah, now it's not. And understand something, these white media executives all have tons of women who have been accusing them of things. This appellate court ruling is meant as a warning to any prosecutors who may be thinking of going off code. It's the court setting up an unofficial boundary for what the prosecutors can and cannot do, is reminding them, hey, you're not supposed to be using those kind of aggressive tactics like introducing prior bad acts against non-black defendants. You can only go that far and that aggressively if it's a black defendant that you're going after. Oh, and before I forget, no less than Tarana Burke was quoted as having said that she sure hopes that the Harvey Weinstein conviction being overturned isn't a blow to the movement. Now, isn't this the same Tarana Burke who, when asked, said that why is it my job to go after white men? She said that because you had a lot of people pointing out her hypocrisy, that she only seemed interested in screaming the Me Too thing if there was a black man sanctioned by the white media to go after. Other than that, she wasn't saying that at all. Never mind the fact that black women like Lupita Nyong'o had made accusations against Harvey Weinstein. Apparently, Tarana, my job is to stand up for black women and girls. She didn't feel like standing up for black women and girls when the accusation was against Harvey Weinstein. But now she's gone from being mum on the issue of white men who are accused of something, so all of a sudden I sure hope that this white man's conviction being overturned doesn't hurt the movement. Oh, now she's concerned. Now it's her job to go after white men, apparently. Now, there is one other thing that I do need to mention in passing. Yogi Berra said that predictions are hard to make, especially about the future. Before Weinstein was convicted, I had done a video 4 years ago saying that he would beat the rap. Now, he was convicted, but you'll notice that I left that post up. I left that video standing Because, as I've said about the Microsoft antitrust lawsuits and these cops who have been murdering black people, you can't really say someone's in prison until you see how the appeals process works out. But there were people who made hay of the fact that Weinstein was convicted by a jury. I got the usual "that didn't age well," etc. Well, it seems the video aged better than the trolls' comments did, and while a retrial for Weinstein doesn't guarantee that he's going to be acquitted, there is something that needs to be said. Black empowerment doesn't depend on whether one white movie mogul goes to prison or not, and the accuracy and reliability of the black media doesn't hinge on the Weinstein case either. Even if the appeals court had upheld the Weinstein conviction, it still would have meant nothing outside of that one case, because as the black media, we make tons of predictions, the overwhelming majority of which turn out exactly like we told you. For example, take my prediction about Trump winning the election in 2016, how a Biden victory in 2020 would turn out to be a total can of worms for us, how Kamala Harris was making all that hay as a senator because she was trying to position herself for a half-baked run for the presidency, and I also predicted how she would utterly fail, and I also predicted that DeSantis was trying to position himself for a 2024 presidential run, and that's what all of his racist stunts were about, and that it would ultimately prove useless. I told you that no matter how much kvetching the white media was doing about DeSantis and Christopher Rufo's asinine machinations down in Florida, I told you that Ron DeSantis' presidential dreams were DOA before it even began. And also that all of that racist agitprop that Rufo was doing, that stuff would get overturned. Their little candidates were going to get trotted out of office. I told you that these guys were going to fail, and this was years before they fell flat on their faces, while the rest of the white media and some black folks who should have known better were telling you that, no, DeSantis is going to be president with a bullet. We're all going to be living under the same racist laws as DeSantis got through in Florida. I told you that the people in Florida ultimately would not be living under DeSantis' racist laws. And that's exactly how it turned out. And those are just a few of the predictions that I made, long before anyone else told you. I made predictions about China's population crashes, plural, 15 years ago. The white media's only caught up to me in the last 2 years. Neither the white media nor the trolls in the comments section are ever right about anything that they say is going to come to pass. The point is, my take on Weinstein was just one of a bunch of predictions that I offer to you on a near weekly basis, the vast majority of which are correct and play out exactly as said. So if the only thing any would-be detractors have to crow about is this one little exception that Weinstein was convicted, then that means they didn't have much to brag about. And you can see how long their bragging lasted. I notice that those people are real quiet about now. See, when you're the black media, it's about playing the long game. The Weinstein case, while noteworthy, ultimately isn't what the credibility of the black media is based on. White supremacy existed long before Harvey Weinstein slithered out from whatever rock he was born under, and regardless of whether he went to prison or not, white supremacy would still be here. Tell me something. After he was sent up the river, did that change the white media's jihad against black people one iota? Did they give up their media mission of deflecting and diverting attention from the white media men who had been put under a spotlight? Did things improve one whit for us? So please tell me what difference it would have made whether he was convicted or not. It changed nothing. The white media's overall goal of demonizing black men to make black men the face of what had been a white male scandal up to that point hadn't changed and wasn't going to, and indeed it didn't change at all. So if you expect me to get all excited about this recent development as being some sort of validation, I don't need to. You only get excited if you're surprised, and I'm not. 4 years ago, I told you what would happen, so as far as I'm concerned, this news is way late. The black media's credibility is ironclad. We're still years ahead of the curve, and one particular trial of one particular scumbag won't change that. And that's the reason why I left up my video from 4 years ago where I said Weinstein would beat the rap. I didn't take it down, didn't edit it, didn't do anything to it. Because I know my enemy. The trolls and wannabe detractors don't. Alright, now back to our commentary on Weinstein. We've been saying since the beginning of Me Too that when the attention was put on all of these white male media executives, that they would go on full alert and use their media monopoly to put a false spotlight on black men, and that's exactly what they did. Their goal was to change the headlines. This was made a lot easier by the fact that these white men in the media control what the headlines would be. They then went on to invent their own phony white media-owned false flag organization, Time's Up, which was created by, funded by, and promoted by the very white male media executives who wanted to change those headlines. I did an entire video naming for you exactly who they are and how much they gave to Time's Up. An organization that's supposed to be all about empowering women, and it was created by, owned by, and funded by a bunch of white males. Individuals who in many cases were themselves accused of sexual misconduct. Men who freely associated with and still maintain close ties to child rapists like Roman Polanski, or people who have been accused of sexually violating their own children like Woody Allen. By the way, I also predicted for you numerous times that Time's Up was going to be the tip of the spear, going after any and every black man they could, which is exactly what they did. I would love to call them controlled opposition, but truth be told, since they own the white media, they didn't really have any opposition, now did they? And so the would-be sexual revolution of Me Too/Time's Up has come officially to its end. Kevin Spacey beat the rap, and while I would like to think that Alec Deadeye Baldwin will go to prison, the reality is at most he'll probably only get some sort of probation, that is, if he accepts a plea deal, though if he does go to trial, he'll probably be acquitted altogether. And that's assuming his legal team doesn't succeed in getting these revived charges tossed out. After all, the state had offered Baldwin a plea deal, but they rescinded the plea deal when they found out that he was planning to make a documentary about his case, and that he had been in contact with some of the witnesses to be in the documentary. So the double standard is still going strong. Now, even with the prospect of a retrial looming, Harvey Weinstein still has his conviction in LA to contend with. His neck is certainly not out of the noose just yet. But the point is that white power wasn't going to let itself be put on the spot, and that it would make sure that if there was one high-profile white man who went down, they would make sure that at least two high-profile black men went down. They certainly maintained that ratio. A lot of the actresses out there who thought that things were going to be different, they thought that jumping on the Me Too bandwagon would jumpstart their stalled careers. Spoiler, it didn't. You had Rose McGowan, who thought to herself that she was going to be able to score some easy make-work gigs for herself, but those didn't pan out. Yeah, those same white media executives, they went ahead and released a phony press release. Oh, we're going to go ahead and have a project that's going to have her in there. See, we're throwing her some work. And no sooner than that stuff got printed, they immediately pulled that back. Oh, it ain't going to be nothing for you. Next thing you know, Rose McGowan was running around with freaking Larry Elder. That's how you know you're scraping under the bottom of the barrel. And of course, there are a few others who are depressed just about now. Mira Sorvino, Ashley Judd, and others. They're heartbroken, gut sick. I'll bet they're sick all right. For a hot second, they thought that they were on a roll. But it turns out that those same white male media executives who they've been thumbing their noses at, well, as far as they were concerned, they were just going to wait this one out. You see, the black media is not the only ones who believe in playing the long game. White supremacy believes in that too. That's the reason why they love a joke that takes a long time to pay off. They have patience when it comes to a cruel prank, when it comes time to see how the thing comes to fruition. They can wait. Sure, patience is not exactly white supremacy's strong suit, but it is part of their repertoire. No matter what the trolls and fools told you, this outcome shouldn't come as a surprise at all. Now, what I want to know is, at this point, whether Kamau Bell's going to come out of hiding and do a documentary about Harvey Weinstein. After all, he was so hot and bothered to do one about Bill Cosby. He had been working on that one since the instant Cosby was convicted. I mean, he couldn't wait to get started. Well, now we have the man whose scandal started the entire Me Too movement. The man who had, albeit briefly, been the face of sexual assault in America. A man who actually had true power, who controlled the careers of countless Hollywood A-list actors, who could blacklist you at will on his own. And yet you don't see Kamau Bell champing at the bit to do a documentary about him. Well, geez, so much for his motivation being that he went after Cosby because he wanted to start a conversation about powerful men. It's all about powerful men and how they use that power. Cosby didn't control anyone's career, not even his own. He didn't have the desire or the ability to coerce anyone into anything. Harvey Weinstein, on the other hand, did. Harvey Weinstein was the quintessential Hollywood mogul. He threatened people's careers constantly, and he had the power and ruthlessness to follow through on those threats, and according to his victims, he did. And he wasn't alone. How many women accused people like Les Moonves of destroying their careers? As the head of CBS, he was certainly in a position to do it. Now, when did Cosby ever wield that kind of power? Answer, he never did. Eli Mistal was cursing and carrying on and acting so outraged about Cosby's case being thrown out on appeal. So he ought to be climbing the walls about this Weinstein development, shouldn't he? He should be cussing a blue streak. But I think we all know he won't be. The white men and the white media who he hopes to get a job from, they won't like it if he calls himself running his mouth about them. Ordinarily, people might say something like, this is the unofficial end of Me Too, but in reality, when you consider that so many white celebrities and white media executives never got charges put on them, they were allowed to gracefully retire or otherwise still allowed to work in many cases, people like Louis C.K. had a documentary being made to rehabilitate his image. When Tom Brokaw was accused, you had all the women at NBC, including Rachel Maddow, racing to defend him. So much for believe all women, huh? In reality, Me Too was contained almost from the very beginning. The white media's goal was to limit the scope of it, and they did. White supremacy understands that sometimes you have to sacrifice a pawn in order to save the king. And the king are not so much the white men who run the white media as much as white supremacy in general. That's the king that has to be preserved at all costs. So, in its own perverse way, I guess all of those whacked-out feminists who were making a big deal 6 years ago were right after all, when they said that with the beginning of the Me Too era, America was experiencing a moment. Well, it seems the moment's over. Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Burkett Cochrane, Morris Bodden, Shrampstein, Semester Hobson, and Williams. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.